what it always comes back to, number one question, how do you guys know each other?
Well, we were roommates.
A couple of times we worked at the same place.
We worked at a snow cone place. So we've just known each other for a really long time. And we're very unalike.
Hey everyone, a quick story. Sir Nicholas George Winton was a British banker and humanitarian who established an organization to rescue children at risk from Nazi Germany. Born to German Jewish parents who had emigrated to Britain at the beginning of the 20th century, Winton supervised and oversaw the rescue of 669 children, most of them Jewish, from Czechoslovakia on the eve of World War II. Winton found homes for the children and arranged for their safe passage to Britain. This operation was later known as the Czech Kindertransport. His work went unnoticed by the world for nearly 50 years until in 1988, when he was invited to the BBC television program That's Life, where he was reunited with several of the children he had saved. The British press celebrated him and dubbed him the British Schindler. In 2003, Winton was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for services to humanity in saving Jewish children from Nazi Germany-occupied Czechoslovakia. On the 28th of October in 2014, he was awarded the highest honor of the Czech Republic, the Order of the White Lion, by the Czech president. He died in 2015 at the age of 106. Hi, everyone. I'm Krachel Fullmer.
And I'm Natalia Bonner. Welcome to the Unalike podcast.
Thank you for joining us for episode 4.
I love that story about Sir Nicholas Winton. And I shared that story recently with you for a couple of reasons. Growing up as a child, I was obsessed with learning about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
You may remember this. There was actually a time when we were children that we went to Boise, Idaho, and went to a Holocaust like a museum. It was one of those like a moving type museum. And the children, I remember being in that museum and seeing the shoes of children that were actual Holocaust victims. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember this glass case of those shoes. And it's just filled my mind ever since, just how important the children are and how amazing it was that he really rescued and helped rescue all those children. Now, when you look a little bit further into his story, you'll learn that even his wife had no idea that he had done such an amazing thing until he was a little bit older in life. And she actually started going through some of his journals and found the logs of all of the children that he had helped rescue. How amazing is that?
Yeah, for that to be done completely unannounced, not looking for accolades, really just doing it for the right reason.
Yeah, just for our children. I love that. Children are super important. And speaking about children, we mentioned our kids have gone back to school now. Things are a little bit different this year, but they are officially back in school. And if you're like me, I'm trying to find all sorts of ways to keep my kids entertained and keep them, excited and happy and going on with life. And so, different activities after school and things like that. We've been making a special effort to once a week have just a special family dinner where our kids have been choosing what restaurant we go and eat.
That's fun.
Simple things. But do you have anything like that you do with your kids, or fun things that you could share or do or inspire us to do with our kids?
I think it's important to make the after-school process just as much fun as the beginning part. And that's because the kids come home and the day's not over. So we're always looking for creative snacks to serve up after school. And one of my favorites is to serve homemade Reese's peanut butter cups. So this is something that we did as children growing up. And I thought this was normal. I thought it happened in every household. But once again, Dustin came to the rescue and reminded me that that must not be the case. In fact, his exact line was, "You were so poor that you had to make your own Reese's." So I don't know. Maybe I was, but definitely smart enough to figure out that when there's a will, there's a way. And so I'm going to tell you, if you have starving children at home, all you need to have are some chocolate chips and some peanut butter and some cupcake liners.
Yes.
So you start out with a cupcake liner. You put it doesn't matter how thick. It depends on how much chocolate you want, but a layer of chocolate chips in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put a scoop of peanut butter on top. And then you do a third layer of chocolate. Okay, but you've got to melt your chocolate chips.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I do. Before I put the peanut butter in, I fill my cup about half full with chocolate chips, and then you put the whole thing in the microwave, 30, 40 seconds, take it out and stir it. You want a nice chocolate that is smooth and has a good consistency. You're laughing at me, but
I'm going to continue going to the store and buying Reese's, but continue.
well, when you're poor, or I lived in the country, like a good 5 miles from town, a good 5 miles from the nearest store. So if you don't have the privilege of hopping on your bike and getting to the convenience store, then you have to make do. So we always begged our mom to buy chocolate chips when we went shopping. She didn't know what we were really up to. But anyway, you melt that chocolate, you get a good consistency. And if it's not melted all the way, put it back in for another 15 seconds. You don't want to burn it. That's important. So until you get it smooth enough, you want to keep putting it back in the microwave. As soon as it's nice and smooth and not burned, you pull it out. And now use a spoon. You might need 2 spoons. So you take a scoop of chocolate out, put your peanut butter in, and then pour this on top.
Alrighty.
Okay? You're not done.
Okay.
Now you put it in the freezer. Freeze it for about half an hour. And 30 minutes from now, you've got the best Reese's Pieces. Reese's peanut butter
cups. So have you actually made these with your children?
No, it's on the list. We like to put chocolate chips in pancakes. And my kids eat pancakes really well, but when we add chocolate chips, now they're fun. And they want twice as many as they would have eaten if they were plain.
Yeah, good idea.
So.
Okay, so I have to bring up this other elephant in the room. Okay, so over the last few weeks, we've really enjoyed everybody's feedback, right?
Yes.
And I've loved hearing from everybody what they thought. And, with your feedback, we can try to improve and get better. But the number one question that we have been asked, you probably feel like you've had the same question, was how do we know each other?
Oh, absolutely. We're hearing it on the street. We're hearing it through social media. We're hearing it from people that we run into in my day job in the office. People that I talk to are complimenting us on how much they have loved following along and being a part of the podcast. But what it always comes back to, number one question, how do you guys know each other? Well,
we were roommates.
We lived together. You weren't of age, but I was in college and you spent...
I did. I spent a summer being your roommate, living with you.
We worked at the same place.
We've been colleagues before.
A couple of times we worked at the same place.
We worked at a snow cone place. We made snow cones.
And we made milkshakes, professional milkshakes, world famous milkshakes, 58 flavors.
Another thing, you were a chaperone on my senior trip.
Oh, yeah. We went to San Diego.
So we've just known each other for a really long time. Mm-hmm. And we're very unalike.
Yeah, very. So I got a graphic the other day. Dustin he just sent it to me and he didn't say anything. So I think that the graphic probably sums up how he feels about me.
Okay.
I'm going to describe this so that those of you who are listening can follow along. At the top of the graphic, it says ADHD storytelling. And there's one box and it says beginning of story and a straight line and it says end of story. Okay, that's version 1. And then version 2 says beginning of story and there's a straight line and it says interrupt to talk to the kids. And then there's a squiggly line that comes down and it says, wait, I forgot what I was saying. And then a straight line that comes back over here and it says, now where was I at? And then a squiggly line back up to here. Oh, I just remembered I need to pay a bill. And then a crisscross down to here. And it says, anyway, there's about 8 of these boxes.
Wait, are you having ADHD telling me this?
Kind of. I just forgot where I was at. I think he thinks that I tell ADHD stories.
I probably have to agree with him.
I don't think it has anything... Oops, sorry, Brandon, our producer. I don't think it has anything to do with ADHD. I have decided it's the difference between men and women. Men like short and concise stories, and they like them to be to the point, almost as if they're in a bullet point manner. And women do what I just described, where their mind, I think it's just because we're so busy. We have so many things running through our mind at one time, whether it's paying the bills, managing the finances, taking care of the kids, being a soccer mom, doing our day job, doing dinner plans. It's hard to get through a story sometimes.
Maybe. Okay, so I have one more question, though, because you have a hard time getting through a story from point A to point B, but you don't have a problem getting from location point A to point B very quickly. You're pretty fast. A couple weeks ago, we talked about your speeding and getting pulled over. And after that, I sat there and thought about it and thought, why do you drive so fast? I never feel the need to drive fast. I never, ever speed. I can't understand why you always feel the need to drive 70 miles over the speed limit.
I have lots of, I'm very busy. I have lots of places to be and I run out of time. And if I can drive fast, it doesn't take me as long to get there. I'm usually running late.
So that's the answer. I'm a person that's always early.
Oh, yeah.
I will leave early and I will drive slow. So maybe that's just the difference.
She brags about how early she gets places.
15 minutes at least.
Yeah. And what do you do for the next 15 minutes?
You know that you're there on time.
But what do you do? That's such a waste of time.
You just know you're on time.
You could have been wrapping up emails. You could have.
You do it on your phone.
Oh my gosh, that's so much work. So we mentioned my friend Marcy last time. Mm-hmm. Marcy once applied for a job, and one of the questions they asked was, "What is your biggest downfall?" And she said, "I am not good at arriving on time." And they gave her the job.
Wow, that's impressive.
She says, after that, I always felt like, well, if I'm late, they can't fire me. I told them in my interview, that's my biggest downfall. So
that's funny. It actually reminded me of a story. When I was a teenager, I decided to apply to get a job at a hotel.
Yeah.
And they didn't hire teenagers to work at this hotel in this position that I was applying for. And I was so excited that I even got the interview and I got all ready and I even wore a skirt. If you know me, this doesn't happen. I don't wear skirts.
Or closed-toed shoes.
Yeah. So I wore all of those things. I put on makeup and I showed up to my interview. I was so excited. Walked right up there and he said, "You're an hour late." And you can imagine the sheer terror.
That's why you're always on time now.
I'm always on time. And I showed up. Somehow I had put the time down wrong. And I walked into that interview. I think I may have even started crying because I was so humiliated that had happened. But guess what? I was the first teenager to ever have that job. So maybe just being honest is always the best option, even if...
Honesty is always the best policy. Yeah, that's what I've been told.
Yeah.
So what's the good news?
All right, lots of good news. It is raining chocolate. Did you know that?
Well, I that's what I hear.
So if you guys are like me, 2020 has been kind of a bizarre year. Just everything going on.
Joke.
Okay, let's hear it.
ADHD. So a man walks into a bar and says, "I'll take 2 hurricanes and 2 Coronas." And the bartender says, "All right, that'll be 2020.
Well, let's have this, and you could add a chocolate bar to it.
Okay.
So there is a town, it's Olten, Switzerland. And a couple of weeks ago, the residents of this town woke up and everything in the town was covered in brown.
Gross.
And they go outside and start smelling it, and it was chocolate. So the Lindt chocolate company, we probably all tasted their amazing chocolates.
Yeah.
Something had happened with their cooling system. It was like a mechanical malfunction. And the chocolate, the little particles of chocolate, actually got into their ventilation system and went out into the town. So the whole entire town was covered in a small coating of chocolate. So at least we know 2020 delivered to those chocolate lovers out there.
Yeah, in one way or another.
That's awesome. I love it.
Wow. I wouldn't mind that.
I don't like chocolate, so I guess we're unalike.
What I know that it's funny that you say that because I do know this about you, but you love Candy.
I love candy.
You brag about how you could have candy for dinner.
I could eat candy breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But when I talk about candy, I'm talking like Willy Wonka stuff here. Like, we don't need this chocolate. We don't need M&Ms, any of that stuff. I need like nerd ropes and just the most kid chocolate or candy you can find out there, like Fun Dips.
Do you see her
I'm in
eyes
heaven.
closing?
I know. I am the most bizarre person out there, but I love candy.
So rather than being colored, oh my gosh, well, colored, but rather than being covered in chocolate, I would rather be soaking up the rays from the sun.
I definitely would too. I love sunshine. And if you know me, you know that I actually intentionally live somewhere because there's a lot of sunshine. And I recently read a little report. It was from The Real World, an online source that just stated 7 random facts of why sunshine is good for us.
Ooh, I want to hear.
I thought I would share those with you. So here's the facts. Number 1. Being outdoors in the sunshine can lift your spirits and reduce stress.
Absolutely.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Number 2, you're generally happier when the days are longer.
Yeah.
And for us, our summer sunshine days are generally longer.
Yep.
The next one, you may feel more lazy and lethargic in the winter.
Oh, if it's middle of summer and you have an overcast day when the sun never comes out, cloud cover all day long, I feel like I have the biggest funk come over me. I lose all of my motivation. I don't want to go to work. I get showered and it's like I just want to put my bathrobe on and climb back into bed.
Absolutely. There's something about the sun that's just amazing. Another one is you're more likely to exercise during the warmer months.
Totally.
You know, get outside.
Well, it's also a draw to go outside.
Yeah, just be outside.
When it's cold, you have to find a gym to go into. You have to bundle up to get to the gym. So I'm on board with that.
Yeah, another awesome one is the warm weather may make you more inventive. So maybe you become more creative.
I don't think I'm creative. Do you do a lot more designing with your quilts?
We have warm weather pretty much all year long. So I just kind of... I enjoy it all year. Yeah, that's the secret if you wanted to know.
Creative people move to a warm, sunny place.
All right, another one. So this goes right back to what you just said. Dark days make us more sleepy. Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that you would even agree with this living, here in Utah, we have a lot of sunshine and a lot of sunny days. Even in the winter, we have sunshine. But I think living in places like Milwaukee, you lived in a climate where they didn't have as much sunshine as we do here. And, there are things people have to do, lights and different things like that.
Yeah. Living in Milwaukee
sun.
Gave me the opportunity to meet a couple of people who relied on I forget what they're called now, but a seasonal affective disorder. And they would have a special blue light that they would sit under or next to every morning. A couple of my coworkers swore by this and would start out every day by getting up and sitting next to their light. And they said that therapy absolutely saved their lives. It literally, it saved them from depression, from mental bouts of anxiety, just by that light produces the chemicals or helps with what they need in order to be able to get through many days of being overcast weather, rainy, lots of rain out there too. And so, yeah.
Pretty cool that we even have these things. And I do think it's important to talk about these things that, the sun is one of those ways we can help heal ourselves and become better, more uplifting people. That warmth and sunshine, it's not mental illness and things like that aren't things that are talked about in our society. And, obviously we've talked even here in this podcast about physical illnesses and things like that people go through, but mental illness is just as important. And it's really important to acknowledge those things and deal with them. And maybe sunshine is the way that you can help, if you're feeling down or something like that. So one more fact about the sunshine, you are more likely to be social when it's sunny. And I would definitely say that because I think we notice that, we're maybe not this year, but in the past, more family reunions and parties with friends and different outings like that, even sporting events like baseball games or things outdoors like that. we seem to enjoy and be more social in maybe the warm months than we are in the summer or in the winter. So I thought that was really interesting. I love the sunshine, so
bring on the sunshine. If you are not a fan of the sun, comment below and let us know why.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine who complains on days when the sun comes out.
It definitely can be pretty hot sometimes, but
I was going back to think about some of those health benefits you talked about, and we know that we can get vitamins from the sun, but I completely agree with the rewards that come for our mental health just by getting outside. And sometimes that means going for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it means saying hi to a neighbor over the fence. But any of these activities that force us to get outside of our house, outside of the office, are known and proven to improve our life and our well-being. So
yeah, absolutely. I love it.
I like that. I like those points, those articles. So I have a say what, so what that I want to share.
Okay.
And this is something that helps to explain how unalike we are.
Okay.
I was talking to somebody the other day who doesn't know me, someone who I would never go into detail to explain my life story to.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized this is something you've never had to do, but when I tell stories, I often fold all of my husbands into one.
Okay.
Because it's easier to not have to explain, well, husband number one, but husband number two.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell this story, so I'm going to give an example.
Okay.
And I haven't shared the details about each of my former husbands, but we did mention in the last episode that my first husband did have his leg amputated, and shortly after that, he filed for divorce. So we worked through that, and he is the father of my children. We're on good terms today. But I did remarry and married a wonderful man who ended up passing away 8 months after we got married.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went through life number 2 and now have married Dustin. So that's a Cliff Note version of what I've been through. But understanding that, I'm going to say, or give an example of what I shared the other day. I say, yeah, so I moved to Wisconsin because my husband was in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
But then I came back and I ended up in this house because my husband had built it. And yeah, so today when we travel down to the valley, we go down there because that's where my husband works. I've just told you a story about 3 different men, all my husbands and all true.
Yes.
But way too complicated to explain to the stranger on the street the dynamics of my living situation or where I live or why I went there or what took me to Milwaukee and why I'm back in Utah. And that's way TMI about me. But in knowing that, probably something you've never had to deal with.
Absolutely. I've never had to deal with that because it's always been just one, which is okay. It's okay to have different types of situations. You know, we all grow from different things and we all learn from different things. Maybe the way that we were raised or whatever was very alike, but it doesn't mean that's how you have to end up in life. There's no right or wrong way to achieve happiness as long as you know you're being the best version of yourself and what you can do in that moment. So.
Yeah, for me it's my norm. I don't know any different, and so as those opportunities come to share something, I just rattle it off. But as we've been doing the podcast, I began to think one day, yeah, probably not too many people tell stories like that.
Say what? Okay, so I do have a so what to share with you. Okay. Every once in a while, we like to include my sewing. You know that I sew. I do machine quilting all the time. So I just wanted to share. I have a brand new class that's starting, and I'm way excited about it. It actually, I have to tell this craziest story. So we work from home, and you know we're always talking about ideas and different things like that in our home. It's kind of a family thing. Everybody's always talking about it. So my little boy that's 8 said, "Mom, you need to make a calendar." And I thought, why would I make a calendar?
Yeah.
So I started thinking about it, and this was 100% his idea to create this calendar. So I have a brand new class that starts on January 1st of 2021 where it's a calendar. So there's one quilt block that we'll do every single month for a whole entire year. They're all stars that we're going to be doing, different things like that. But as a part of it, we got this crazy idea, and we've never done anything like this, but from every single one, we now have a calendar we created.
Wow.
And from the sale of each of those calendars, we've already set up an account, and it's going to be part of his college fund. We're like, this is the perfect way for him to feel like a sense of pride and ownership over these calendars, that this was really all his idea. So that's my so what for the week. Kind of fun. I love involving, and like I said, the children. And I think it's a good way, talking about our children, to tie in our guest today, that our Unalike hero.
Yeah, so joining us today is Kara Petrus, and Kara has an amazing story that begins almost almost a quarter of a century ago, is what I was going to say, when she and her husband Brian found out that they were not going to be able to have kids. Kara was really worried about what to do. It's something that they had dreamed of doing together. And so she had to start getting creative and thinking outside of the box about how they would be able to start their family. We had a chance to catch up with her, and here's a look at our conversation.
Kara, thanks so much for being here. We're excited to see you and catch up. And you went through something that I think is completely a hero action, and that is the steps that you took in order to start your family. So we're going to go clear back 20 plus years ago to once upon a time when a young boy and girl fell in love, and you and your husband Brian got married, and let you take it from there for a few minutes and tell us about those first few years.
Yeah, we got married. I was 20, he was 21, but we live in Utah, so it was like, you get married and immediately you want to have babies. It's just like everybody's having babies. So we started to try to have babies, and in those, it took 3 years, and in those 3 years we did IUI, which is not IVF. It's not as expensive. It's kind of before that, and a couple other things, and nothing worked. So it was really unexplained fertility. We never really knew why we couldn't have babies. It just didn't happen. And we were doing everything they told us to do. It just didn't happen. So around the third year, we were looking into adoption, just regular adoption through just through facilities and things, and going to meetings. Like one was Heart to Heart. I don't even know if they're around anymore, but we went to that, and it was like, for a baby, it was like $20,000. And by then we're 22, 23. And we're like, yeah, we really have $20,000. I mean, we had a house, but we didn't have any money. So that was pretty disappointing. So I ended up looking up foster care. I honestly don't even remember why I looked it up. I don't know if it was in the phone book under adoption. I honestly don't remember. I just remember I was a medical assistant then, and I remember looking it up in the phone book, and that struck me. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to go home. I'm going to talk to Brian. I went home. I turned off the TV, and I told him, I really feel like this is what we need to do. And he knew I was crazy to have kids. So he was just like, okay. Like, I don't think either one of us knew what we were getting into, but the whole it's free deal was where they got us. We were broke. We both worked, but you're 22, you don't have $20,000 just to get somebody. So
Yeah.
And then we found out that it's initially, it's free. And then when you have the kid in care, like if they're younger than 5, you automatically get WIC. They're on Medicaid. So all these things that you don't really, nothing comes out of your pocket except for clothes. And you do get a stipend every month, depending on the needs of the child and how old they are and all that. And you have to spend a certain amount on the child, and the rest can go toward your utilities or whatever. You just have to keep track. But then when you finalize, you pay the lawyer their small fee. I think it was like $1,000. And then like 2 weeks later, the state reimburses you. So initially, it's just free, considering my children I had biologically, I'm probably still paying hospital bills 13 years later. It feels like it, Anyway, so we got Krista.
Yeah.
And we had her for a month, and I found out I was pregnant.
Wow.
Just like that. Mm-hmm. And I showed Brian the test, and he went, like, holy crap.
Because you're now, just to put this in context, you've gone through the process, found out that you're a qualified home, you have passed, and you're going to be able to bring children into your home. So you've decided you're officially doing this. You're going to be fostering, and the first child to be placed with you is a little girl named Krista.
She was 4 months.
Okay.
And we started the foster care process in July, which is classes. They come to your home. You have to lock up all your like garage materials that are toxic, and you have to lock up all your medicines in the house. All this stuff. Have enough space for a child. It's not. I mean, they can share a room with your kids, but I have to have a certain amount of square feet for them. They have to go all through this. Somebody comes in and does a home study, make sure you have a fire extinguisher, all that stuff. So that takes a while. I mean, I was pretty on the honest spot because I wanted a baby. I was like, okay, paperwork's in, but it still just takes time. There's people that have to come out, and it's out of your hands after a while. But that was in July, and Krista was born in July the 14th, so it's actually, we obviously didn't know. And then she was placed with her biological grandma. And biological grandma was not supposed to let the bio parents see her because she was born with meth in her system. So they immediately wanted to place with a different, not the parents. And a couple months into that, bio dad's house was raided because he had a meth lab. And Krista was there, which she shouldn't even have been there. And her older brother was there too, which was 8. I think he was around 8. And he was taking care of Krista. Like, he was getting up in the middle of the night with her. He was the one caring for her. And so about that time, we were licensed, and they called us. And it was right after we were all done. It's just like total meant to be steps, like thing after thing happened until she came to us. So she may have, come out of this okay. But Charlie's family were dangerous people, and like I can literally say we saved his life. Like, foster care saved his life. It just did.
Yeah, so let's skip ahead and talk about Charlie. Well, before we get to Charlie, let's stop for a second, because then you have Paisley, and
yeah, we had Brady and then Paisley.
Found out you were able to get pregnant a second time. Yeah,
it took about 8 months, but I told Brian we would try for 6 months because he didn't really even want another kid. He's like, we won. We got a boy and a girl. We're good. And I was like, but that was 6 years ago, and I was so tired. And now I want one that I'm not tired. So
a little bit more of a...
I said, let's try 6 months, and then he just forgot. So it took us 8 months.
Okay, so Paisley was born. And then I think for a long time, your family was complete. You had Krista and Brady and Paisley, and they all look alike. We're going to share a picture of your family here in a minute. But you've told me that people often look at the family photo and cannot decide who the adopted child is.
Yeah, they never think it's Krista, because she honestly looks a lot like me. She looks a lot like a birth mom too. But I think they all develop personalities like us and facial expressions and, things like that. So and Krista and Brady were so close, like people would think they were twins because they had like the same nose and stuff. And Brady was a big kid and Krista was small. So they always kind of looked like twins, and they just look a lot alike.
Yeah. So life moved on, and your husband changed jobs a couple times. I know you ended up moving away and out of state for a while. And you told me a really sweet story. While you were out of state, you had an experience that planted a thought into your mind.
Well, it was actually when we moved back to Utah. It was like it was probably the year after we moved back. I can't even remember what kind of things were coming up, but I kept thinking of foster care. Like, it just kept coming up. I honestly don't remember what things happened, but then I went to Barnes & Noble around that Christmas to just get some books. I was getting gift cards for teachers for Christmas. And they asked me if I wanted to donate to foster care for books for foster care. And I was just like, okay, I've got to do foster care.
That's not a sign.
Like, it was one of those moments where I just like, okay, I heard you. You know what I mean? And we walked out and I told Brian, okay, we've got to do this. And he's like, whatever. He's like, it's going to be, he helped a ton. Like, any kids we had in our house, it's like just his kid. So, I'm home with them all day. I'm the one taking them to their appointments and making sure they have their medicine or whatever. That's just, that's what I do. He works and then we do it together when he's home, but it's like it's a job.
Yeah. So Charlie's number 4, and Charlie comes into the picture in an unconventional way.
Let's see here. His family they were in the foster care system because his oldest or not his oldest brother, his next up brother, who's 2, had a melanoma on his head, and the parents weren't taking him in for treatment. So they called in foster care to have caseworkers check on it, make sure they would get the treatment, stuff like that. And in the meantime, they would go do visits, and they noticed that every time they go there, Charlie would just either be in his crib, or he'd be in a car seat, or he'd be facing out on someone's lap. So, you could just tell they weren't the best at interacting with their children. And, the older kids were getting calls all the time from school. The kids were dirty and wearing the same clothes, just things that, teachers are amazing. If they weren't there, half of these kids wouldn't be in care. And honestly, that's what scared me about COVID, was kids like that sometimes that's all they get is teachers and food from school. So that's one reason why I was glad to have school go back too. But anyway, we get a call that, honestly sounds like the guy that called me to tell me about the placement said it sounded like a movie. And I was like, yeah, it does. He said, we have a little boy who's 8 months old. And he said his older brother, who was, I think he was 8 or 9 then, smothered the 2-year-old little boy to where he passed out. And then he did it again until he killed him. And then they took the baby up to the parents who were home and just said, we've killed him. So that was how he finally came into care. When you adopt, you get to read their folders. Chris's was like this, because there was literally no information. Like, she was born, right here, that was it.
Yeah.
Charlie's family had 3 binders this thick.
Wow.
When we read them, we were so emotionally exhausted when we left. It was just sickening. And, then you see people that are like, oh, foster care sold my children. I'm like, oh, no, they do a lot before they take them out of the home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So of course, it was actually funny because we were getting ready. We were going to go to Yellowstone that weekend. And I called Brian and I said, well, do you want to go to Yellowstone or do you want to get a baby? And he's like, I guess we'll get a baby. So Brian called him Baby Yellowstone for a long time because we didn't get to go on a trip. But he was somewhat different than Krista, a little the same. You could tell they were both neglected, where like Krista, she was happy to just lay on the ground. Like, our job when we got her, they told us her homework was to hold her and make sure that we held her and talked to her, because honestly, if I laid her on the ground, she was happier. If we held her, she was like, she just wasn't used to it. Mm-hmm. And with Charlie, you could tell he hadn't been really talked to, because he was just kind of somber. Like, he would smile and things, but he was a pretty somber baby. And he was also very vocal. Like, most babies wake up in the morning and they cry or whatever, and you pick them up and they're done. He literally wouldn't stop crying until there was food in his mouth, like going from the bedroom to the kitchen. Just immediately opens his eyes and he's crying. Like, he hasn't been soothed in the way that babies, so he just learned to just scream. So he was a very hard baby. Like, it was enough to be like, okay, this is number 4, we're good.
Yeah.
But there was one time, he was probably 2, but it was when we went on a trip, Krachel, with Unique. My mom, she watched the kids, and she was telling Paisley how, oh, Charlie is so hard, blah, blah, blah. And Paisley said, Grandma, you got to remember where he's been, though. Actually makes me cry. She says, you got to understand what he's been through, and that's why he is the way he is. And my mom was like, oh my God, it just struck me. Like, she's so right. I have to give him a little leeway, because he is, even today he does some stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my mind. But then I think of where he came from and where his older siblings are now. And we truly saved his life. His older siblings one's really autistic, which she was that way anyway. And the other one he's the one that smothered the little brother. And he's got some horrible emotional issues.
Yeah.
The things we read in his file about him, I'm like, it's just amazing that we got Charlie out when he was a baby, and he still has trauma, even being a baby. Like, it's just crazy what people do to their kids.
You shared some information with me about what studies show with babies who are in the womb, and the things that become trauma triggers for them just off of the first couple months of their life. And I was really intrigued by some of the things that you've learned and experienced firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. Even with Krista, like, she used to annoy the crap out of me. She would wake up in the morning and the first thing is, what are we having for dinner? And I'm like, oh my Lord, Becky, I cannot listen to what we're having for dinner. I even have breakfast. But then I was at a foster care class, and they said something about food. And so I asked the question, I'm like, is this something? And they're like, oh, it's absolutely something to do with that. Because her mother was on meth, so she absolutely wasn't being fed like she should have been in the womb. So from day one, her triggers were food. Like, she was constantly looking for food. And I even mentioned that to Krista, and she's like, I do. I think about food all the time. Like, it's just, what am I going to do next? What meal am I going to have next? I mean, and it's totally from that. And she was 4 months old.
Yeah.
And we there's a class through foster care that it's trauma. It's called trust-based relational intervention. I want to make sure I got that right. And it's a lady named Kara Petrus that created it. She had some special needs kids, but it's all trust-based. Instead of like with Charlie, I couldn't send him to timeout. I have to do time in, because timeout is a big trigger to him because he was alone all the time. If I would do timeout with him, he would have a complete freak out in his room and destroy it. But if I do time in, where he sits in the kitchen with me and just stays there while I'm making dinner and I keep checking in with him, have him do some deep breaths, then it's over in 10 minutes. But just things like that I would have had no idea about unless I took this class.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, I honestly think the foster care classes in general, they should have kids in high school take them before they graduate. Yeah, because absolutely. Every parent should know them. Even just silly things like, I learned with Chris, is like, don't make your kids hug your relatives when you leave. If they don't want to, just okay, fist bump. Because now you don't know if Uncle Joe is molesting him, and you're saying, no, go hug him. It's okay. This is what you should do. Yeah. It's just silly things like that I got from this class where it's like, wow, I wouldn't even have thought of, because I've not been around that.
Yeah.
But you have to think of those things now.
So Krista has, I think, has the best story, because she graduated a year ago. She has gone into college. She's studying to work in a veterinarian's clinic, and just recently completed her first year of college, but working into the second year. And she was recently in a car accident, and you shared on Facebook a photo of all of Chris's term report showing her attendance records. And even with that accident in the middle of it all, she has perfect attendance.
Yeah. And she had honor roll a couple times. And what's even weirder is I was like, wow, I just found him in the office. And I was like, why would you not show me? This is amazing. You got perfect attendance. And she says, well, it's not a big deal. And I was like, Krista, do you realize how many college freshmen never go to class because their parents aren't there?
Right.
And they're just like, I'm not going to school. You know what I mean? Like, she didn't even think it was that big of a deal. Like, she just does it. Yeah. She wasn't living with us the whole time, so she didn't have to, But I'm like, she just, the biggest probably thing is she's paying for school on her own. She's doing it all on her own. I mean, you look at her, she did have an apartment. She's paying for her school on her own. She's getting there on her own. She's doing all this homework, and she actually has ADHD, and her and Charlie both do, and it's more of a trauma-induced ADHD where I can't even think of what it is in the front of your head isn't formed, or is formed different. So your impulse control and things like that are off. So it's ADHD, but it's kind of trauma stuff too. They just treat it like ADHD because it's, things that go along with that. But even with that, she's done amazing in school, and she's amazing.
Yeah, as you and I have talked, you pointed that out to me, or reminded me that there is some income assistance there for families who decide to go the foster care route, but that's not free money. That's not something you and Brian are taking and saying, let's go on a vacation. You have realized that you thought everything with Krista was great when she came into your home, but over the years you've learned there's actually a lot of, even if it's just paying for therapy, there's a lot that needs to still be put towards these kids to help them overcome the trauma that they've been through. So Charlie is a little bit of a neighborhood hero, I hear.
He is. Everybody knows him. I go into Smith and they're like, hey, Charlie. And he's like, why does that person know me?
So you keep a pretty great account of him and all of his little antics. And you've shared things on Facebook like Charlie knows every single car that comes down the street, the make, the model, the year. You've shared that he, you have to do a pocket check every morning before he leaves for school.
Yeah, because he carries, and when he gets home from school, he changes shorts. Because if I send him with ones that don't have pockets, he changes shorts, and he puts his spoiler keys, a tape measure, handcuffs, these little horns he carries around, all back in his pocket, like his pants are falling down. I have to take him out in the morning, and then he comes home and puts them back in. He does like Brian does every night too. He takes them out and sets them on his nightstand. And I think he does it because Brian does it too, but it's just funny. And he does, I mean, he steals, not steal, I guess he does steal. He steals our car keys. But like if you ask him where they're at, he's like, oh yeah, and he runs in his room and gets them. I think it's funny thing, which is also a trauma thing. Like he likes to have control because he knows nobody can ride the Razor or four-wheelers or go in the car without that key. So he's just like, well, I'll put it in my room. Oh yeah,
I know where it is.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. You also talked about him. Well, he's got a huge love for construction, and as a disclaimer, Brian works in construction, but that seems to be just another natural thing for Charlie. He's really drawn to all things big machinery. And so I don't know that you've necessarily done it for Christmas or for birthday gifts, but you've gone and bought small machines just for the purpose of letting him take them apart and let him put them back together, correct?
Yeah, we go to the DI and I just get stuff that has a ton of screws in them, like old toys, and I just let him take them apart and put it together. Sometimes he takes it apart and doesn't put it together, and I just throw it away when he's at school. But
we need to back up and say he's now how old?
He'll be 7 in a couple weeks.
So we kind of smile and laugh about him and his cute personality, but it hasn't all been easy for him either. And of course, you guys definitely rescued him from a horrible situation. But what have you seen in him since he came to your home?
The number one thing is just seeing his personality blossom. Like, you know, he was kind of a horrible baby. Like he didn't smile a lot. It was really hard to console. That kind of thing. He, you know, looking back, he totally had ADHD even when he was like 1 and 2. He's just on the move at all times. Like, I mean, literally had locks on everything in the house, and then he'd figure out how to take the lock off. Like, we'd put baby locks on, and you could just see him watching us as they were put on and thinking, okay, how am I going to take that off? 2 days later, the move. Like, he just figured it out.
Yeah.
But we took him to a therapist before we started meds or anything. I took him to a therapist, and they did. God, I can't even remember the treatment now, but they hooked these things all over to your head, and then they had him watch a cartoon. And if he was cool and calm, then the screen was big. But the more he like fidgeted or didn't pay attention, the screen would go small and the volume would go down lower. So it was like a focusing thing. And after he would do that every week, he was great for like a week. Like the ADHD symptoms they weren't gone, but they were, I mean, we could be around him and not be nuts the whole time. And that worked for a good, 6 months. And then it just kind of stopped working. So that's when his therapist was like, I think it's time to try ADD medicine. I think it's time. And honestly, I was glad that I'd gone through those steps because she made it okay. Because it is kind of a taboo thing to start your 4-year-old on medicine. But to hear a therapist say, yeah, it's time. We've done what we need to do, So we put him on medicine, and it was like a light switch. Like the next week he went to therapy, and he was putting puzzles together with her. And I bought a puzzle at a dollar store, and he put it together, and he couldn't sit down to do a puzzle before that.
Wow.
He puts puzzles together upside down. He puts them together, and then he turns it over and does them upside down. Like,
wow.
He's really like, Brian's like, oh, why is it upside down? I'm like, oh, that's how Charlie put it together. So he did it upside down. He does Legos. He's just a very hands-on, tactile kid. But we finally did ADHD medicines, and I didn't know when you do those medicines, it's like, in my head, I thought, oh, you give him 1, you're good. But there's so many different medicines we had to try through 4, get him balanced. And then, he starts having anxiety because of the trauma. So we had to put him on anxiety medicine. It's a big deal. Where before I just thought, oh, slap a pill in them and they're good. It's a lot of balancing. And I was super fortunate that I had the pediatrician that his family had before I even knew him. So his pediatrician knew his older kid siblings. They knew the parents. So they knew the whole history, because, I mean, this is kind of a crazy history. I don't feel like telling everybody every visit I go to about it.
Yeah.
So it was just simple because he already knew. He knew what the older siblings were like, what kind of things they'd been through. And so he's super good where I call him, I'm like, hey, Charlie's off. This is what he's doing. He's like, okay, well, let's increase the medicine. So he doesn't always make me go in. He totally trusts me. And we both are on the same page because we've been there the whole time.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, Kara, I know that this started out as an opportunity and a journey for you and Brian to start a family, but I think that honestly, I know that you are humble enough to look at it like this is how we got our family. But I want to take a step back and spin that and say that in my eyes, you are a hero because you have saved 2 lives and helped out with a couple of others who came into your home on temporary placements. And I think the absolute world of you and Brian for the work that you have put into raising these 4 kids.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing the intimate details of your family's story. It's a beautiful one, and I think all of our listeners and viewers can agree that you are absolutely a hero, and the things that you and Brian have done during your marriage are absolutely amazing, and we just couldn't thank you enough for being willing to open up and share those details with us.
All right. So speaking of kids, did you know, well, maybe husbands too. Did you know my husband's a sea otter?
No.
Well, my husband is a sea otter. In my home, it is a really important thing, according to my children, that you have to have a spirit animal. I don't know if this is a thing out there, but my kids have decided that you have to have a spirit animal. So they have designated each of us a spirit animal. Mine is a giraffe. This is a story that you may be able to kind of understand, but when I was a child, I had a plate. That was one that was like this acrylic plate that it was my plate. That's all I ate on. It was the only thing I was allowed to eat, or I allowed myself to eat on. And it had a giraffe on it. I don't have it anymore. It broke. But for some reason, I've always just loved giraffes. So now I am a giraffe. My daughter is a zebra. My son is a lion. And my husband is a sea otter. Occasionally he switches to a flamingo, but most often he is a sea otter.
Hold on. Why?
So at the time that my children were deciding that we all needed a spirit animal, we went to the zoo. And if you've ever been to the zoo and watched the sea otters, they dive in the water and cool off, and then they just lay in the sun and just enjoy the sun all day, every day. And when we sat there and watched them, my husband said, in life, I am aspiring to be a sea otter. So he is now a sea otter.
What about a flamingo?
So if you ever watch Planet Earth or shows like that, flamingos are very fascinating. They're just the way they live, their rituals, things like that. They're a very fascinating bird. So he loves flamingos, and he also is a flamingo. They love the sun. They love the warmth.
Does Brad impersonate flamingos?
We're still working on that. If I can get him to do it, I will definitely post a video.
I want to see.
But he definitely impersonates sea otters.
For all of Brad's friends who are watching this, I can't wait to hear the public roasting when they find out that Brad's sea animal is indeed a flamingo. That's it for this episode of the Unalike podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Be sure to like, comment, and share, and we will see you again next week.